Hi, everyone. Welcome to Got Therapy. I'm Michael Baltimore, hosting this show with Dr. Dan Rose next to me, the director of the Counseling Center here at Columbus State University. Dan, welcome to the show.
Hey, welcome to my show.
It's your show.
That's right. Thanks.
That's right. That's what we do. All right, so I'm glad you're here. We're going to talk about some interesting things. We always talk about.
One interesting thing.
I'm sorry?
One good interesting thing.
One good interesting thing.
I surprised you with it. I surprised because right now you're attempting to find out what it is.
All right, we've already started, haven't we?
Yeah,
okay,
right, yeah,
so
that's right, yeah,
I was attempting to do a brief introduction to what we're about to talk about, but it's too late. We're already talking about it.
We're already,
so you surprised me by saying, and I said some things, and you said, no, one thing.
That's Cher's mom. No, that was a different conversation.
Here you go again.
But no, it wasn't Cher's mom.
Okay.
It's a thing called emotional induction.
Emotional induction, and it just happened a moment ago. That was almost a demonstration.
And broadly defined, it's a way in which you get, usually unconsciously, someone to feel something unintentionally. And we do this all the time. In fact, the very first communicative act that we have as children is we are yanked from the womb into this difficult, dangerous universe. The first thing we do is cry. And that, in and of itself, is an act of emotional induction. It generates a feeling in the mom in which she will then interact with you. It begins the bonding, that attachment system creation.
All the attachment we've talked about here on the show. This is sort of underlying all of that.
It's it.
Right.
But when you say underlying is important. Right. Because in the beginning, baby can't speak, man, right?
True.
Baby can just cry, do all sorts of stuff. And at the beginning, it's but it's far more complex than we realize. But it's a little narrow form of emotional communication that occurs.
Well, and we learn what it can get us, right? I mean, it teaches the child coming up what they can get, not get, and how to interact with the environment and the objects.
Hey, got me a Porsche because I whined enough, and my wife let me buy one.
I finally got the car you've been looking for.
Right,
well, it happens all the time throughout our life, almost moment to moment.
I'm only going to get one Porsche. That's
not another Porsche. No, not
that's
that.
Not gonna happen.
But the idea of this emotional induction. So this idea that we want someone else to connect to our emotion or have something happen in a similar way for them, or there's just some way of manipulating other people, I would assume, with this. So there's probably some good and bad with this notion.
Some researchers would say that all emotional communication at its heart is manipulative, unconsciously so.
Right.
But you're attempting to induce and to generate a behavior based on your emotional displays.
Is there a goal for that? I'm trying to get this to happen because...
like, for instance, if in an animal, like, for instance, if you go to pet your dog and suddenly his back arches up and he growls, he is attempting to induce an emotion in you, one of fear. However, the dog himself is also afraid. So his reaction is one of fear, which then he finds a way to give to you. And by backing away, he has induced the emotion of fear into you.
Oh, that's interesting. So there can be some contagion with this emotion. Whatever emotion I may be feeling at the moment, and the people around me may begin to pick up on and do something with that, or reject it. I guess if you try to induct me toward that emotional...
Well, look what happened with the dog. If I suddenly bucked up myself,
right,
the dog may then cower in the corner. So he attempted to induce fear in me. I then, like a game of tennis, bounced it back into his court, and what does he do? He then recedes. And most of our animal brethren are incapable. You can think of there are two broad communication styles. There's emotional communication and cognitive linguistic language. Two big broad categories.
Got it.
When we're babies, we only got the emotional part. Slowly but surely, we begin to develop symbolic and cognitive communication style. That we get that. Our animal brothers and sisters do not, as by and large, ever really get the cognitive stuff.
Right.
So you have these two forms of communication.
That makes sense.
The emotional stuff is always present, and it's what often gets us in trouble in our day-to-day activities. Like, I do a lot of work with couples.
Yes.
And you done work with couples as well?
Absolutely. Yep.
I'm married, sort of.
Yes.
I mean,
I'm not sure where you're going with that.
Yeah.
Yes. So dissertation on all of that stuff, and then private practice for that. Yes.
So you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
So when two couples come in, oftentimes it is the...
Well, one couple. but yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, I work with a lot of Mormons.
Okay.
That's a joke.
All right, that's a good joke. Back to sorry
thing
to
about
interrupt,
Mormons,
but I do
I
that.
charge lots of different insurance.
See, there's a problem. I take you right off. I don't mean to take you off. I need to control that a little bit better. I will not
There should be like
interrupt next
a
time.
taser.
Yeah, that would help. All right, but the couple comes in.
The couple comes in. You know this is so that there often is a problem in communication.
Okay.
And it often has to do with this emotional induction.
Mm-hmm.
The way in which there are unconscious messages being sent. And part of the work of couples therapy is to getting people to be able to speak more clearly, maybe to be more cognitive about their emotions.
Right, sometimes,
maybe.
yes. Mm-hmm.
Or maybe to be able to be less cognitive about their emotions.
Absolutely.
And also with supervising therapists, we both do that.
Yep.
One of the things that a therapist will experience in the presence of one of their clients or patients is they may suddenly find themselves getting very, very anxious, and they're wondering why. And they may move to a place, I'm a bad therapist, or this is horrible, I'm going to get out of the room, whatever the case may be. Mm-hmm. But this may be an act of emotional induction.
Yeah, and we were mentioning contagion. I mean, that it's very easy, particularly at an unconscious level, for this to begin to creep up on you, and all of a sudden you feel depressed.
Right.
Like the person is talking about their depression or whatever that might be. And so it can kind of overwhelm.
And with couples, with a married couple or a couple, that sort of contagion can be long-standing. It can be it can poison over the long run, generate all these patterns of interaction that are difficult and damaging.
Yeah, and then go on for a long period of time throughout a person's life. If it begins early on, as you mentioned a moment ago, then during that attachment phase and the early formation of a person's personality and learning to deal with their environment, then that may be some things. It was particularly if they were abused or neglected or having problems early on in their life.
If you take us back to that birth, if the baby cries and the person receiving that cry is unable to meet them at least halfway, then there is a potential for problem. With say some moms, for instance, who've had, like you mentioned, an abuse history, a baby's cry might induce some post-traumatic symptoms, and that could really get in the way of a capacity to bond, and in turn, that sets in motion some difficulty for future attachments with a child, and also the way in which our initial emotions are received by a more neuropsychologically mature individual allows us then to be able to make use of them, because the baby literally is told what their feelings are and how to deal with their feelings by those initial interactions. Right. We learn to name and make use of our emotions as a result of that early pattern of interaction.
Right, and sometimes that may not be that accurate for that individual. Maybe they're just being manipulated a little bit themselves and have to identify their own feelings and reactions to another. All right, so in therapy, now one of the things that happens in therapy is sometimes we have to go back to go forward. There are a lot of models out there that would basically say, okay, we've got to go uncover, discover some of these early issues that have blocked a person's development. And so you want them to go back to that emotional state, that emotional field, to feel that trauma again, as it were, in order to work through that process. So you may, as a therapist, induct that emotion by getting them to talk about those things that
there was a guy named Franz Alexander. I think he hung out with another guy named Green, who was part of the Chicago school. And they would literally, and I'm not kidding you not, they would put on these fake breasts, and they would have the patient sit in their lap, and they would literally regress as if they were being breastfed again, as if they were babies.
Sounds very strange.
It does.
But besides
sounds a little like my wedding.
Besides law enforcement getting involved in that, the notion that they wanted to regress someone back to a particular in that case, very early on. But I mean, in general, therapists move back to whatever once it's identified that trauma or that particular issue in the relationship they're having, an emotional field, they want them to go back to sort of re-experience that and somehow gain some control.
Yeah, then there would be the corrective emotional experience.
Right.
And the Alexander and those guys actually coined that term, and they took it a little too far, because I don't normally breastfeed people.
No. Well, Yalom talked about that as well. This correctional motion, this movement to try to identify the feeling and kind of work through it to a point where there is some control and resolution with that, and the person's more in control of that emotional reaction at times.
Well, yeah, as you said that, because you talk about, like, because I might even think not just about the past, but one way to think about this, this notion of emotional induction, is how it can be useful just in your day-to-day experience.
Yeah, let's talk
Because
about that.
I think oftentimes we are moved into a place unintentionally by another person, and we're unaware of it, and then we act out on what we're feeling. If it could be as simple as you go to get your coffee at one of the beanery or what are that
Starbucks.
Starbucks. There's
Yeah.
got the Starbucks. Okay, they got the good. I've never actually had a cup of coffee.
Really?
Never drank a cup of coffee in my
All
life.
right, that's a separate show, and ladies and
That is
gentlemen, tune back in. We're going to talk about that
I've
more
never
on
had a
another
cup of
show.
coffee.
That's
I've just
it's okay.
say no to drugs.
I would say that you don't really need to induct any caffeine. Okay, so I want to say that part right
You
there.
think I'm a
No
mellow
induction
guy
of caffeine.
already.
We're talking
I'm
about
kinda
induction
mellow.
of emotion, but the caffeine is good. You're good. You're
Good, I'm good with it.
That would add too much. So
But maybe I should like what's a mellowing food?
chamomile tea.
Chamomile tea, yes.
I would
Honey
think
said
maybe.
chamomile. Okay, so you go to your Starbucks,
Right.
and you're gonna get one of your frappuccinos.
Yes. Whatever
You want
that is,
to
yes.
what a fry. That's what the hip people eat.
Yeah,
their
the
frappuccinos.
hipsters now are.
So you
doing a lot of
set
it.
your frappuccino. You say, "Hey, I want this frappuccino," and the person behind the counter, unbeknownst to you, has been having a very bad day.
Right.
Their dog is sick. Somebody kicked their cat. They have bunions or something going on.
Bad day for them.
It's just going on.
And something's about to happen to you
And
as a result.
they can be on the surface polite, but they can send you nonverbal, and so we'll call them emotional communications
Uh-huh.
that may induce you a feel of unease. You may find yourself feeling all sorts of stuff.
Okay.
And you may leave that encounter, and it could technically ruin the rest of your day. This happens, am I wrong?
Oh, yeah. I think that happens a lot to people, right? And in
But
various situations.
knowing that other human beings have the capacity to generate in you emotional storms and conflicts, being able to give it a name allows you to do something else with it. And this is where our friends, the Buddhists, and this notion of mindfulness comes in.
Okay.
At that moment, if you are checking in with yourself, you may be aware, wait a minute, right now I'm feeling kind of crappy, and I have a frappuccino. I should be the happiest man in the world.
Right. I was looking forward to that. Getting
With
the
a
coffee,
frappuccino in my fist,
frappuccino of
I
all
can take over the
things.
world.
Right.
Well, you're not feeling it.
No, you're not, because the guy with the bunions.
The guy with the bunions. And
Absolutely.
By the way, Bunions, Paul Bunions, that guy with a giant ox, right?
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah.
All
right.
So you got the frappuccino in your fist.
Free
You sh-
association next week, but then that
That's it, yeah.
own emotional
You should be
induction.
feeling on top of the world. If you allow yourself a moment of mindfulness, a moment of check-in, a sacred pause, as it were, you might be able to say to yourself, wait a minute, what am I feeling? Is this my feeling? Where is this coming from? And then you might identify the source. Wait a minute. I think the guy who's giving me my frappuccino is having a bad day.
Wow. Okay, so, yeah,
Well,
go ahead.
you have two choices here.
Right, I was thinking you
can
do now
then
have a choice, right?
Cure yourself, and if you wanted to, share the love. You might even be able to say the frappuccino guy. You might even be able to, in your own way, say, hey man, hope it sounds like you're having a tough day. Hope it's a better day for you.
Gets better for you here.
And the
Let me
bunion
buy
guy-
you a frappuccino,
Yeah,
in fact.
have a sip.
Have a sip.
Have a
here.
sip of my frappuccino. Can you fraternal frappuccino? I don't know, but
No, but I mean, you can do something about it. When you have that, well, first the mindfulness notion that you're aware that this is happening, and then you have some control charge in this, and you can go and maybe make a difference in that. And not be the contamination notion again, that you just carry that with you out of the coffee shop, but and then ruin your day, as you mentioned.
and I suspect that for many of us out there in the listening or watching world, they're not just listening. Hopefully you're watching and listening.
Yeah, hopefully.
Hopefully you're watching because I got some new beard oil and I'm liking the way this is looking.
All right.
Hopefully Yeah, but
Okay,
smells nice too.
Yeah, well, I haven't.
Can't smell it?
We don't have smell-o-vision.
Okay.
But yes.
But you may be surprised that often the ups and downs of your day, the turbulences you have throughout your day, may be a result of some of this emotional induction, the collision you have with your fellow human beings. And if you're aware of it, you might be able to navigate your interactions with the world a little differently. It may be less like this and more like this. And that might actually make your day a little better, but it could also help other people's days too. Because if you are aware of and can name this
Right.
and be in that sort of mindful space.
All right, so for me, I'm thinking responsibility. Do we have a responsibility, even though I may be having a bad day, not to contaminate you or bring this out and cause this emotional induction in you? Shouldn't I be in control of, what's happening with me and what I give out to others in
Well,
this,
here's
in
the
this
thing.
notion?
I am a Freudian at heart, and our man
Oh.
Freud said that we are not the captains of our soul or our fate.
Oh,
The best we can have, we can be as cognizant as possible, we can be as mindful as possible of our own emotional state, but by and large, we often, in most instances, are only aware after the act.
right.
In fact,
Okay.
there's some research
Yep,
to
I know what
suggest
you're
there's is it 0.3 milliseconds? We actually act and then think afterwards. So often, our freedom isn't to choose, but our freedom is actually to make use of the choice we just made. So I might say is, if you can practice the sort of mindfulness that may make you a more responsible human being, but you also might want to just give yourself permission to, well, how are you, to be a douche.
Well, you never know, and when that happens for
Can I
some
say
of
that?
us, yeah, you just said it. It's too late now. So I'm thinking though that we should be mindful. I guess that's the message out of this, and know that you can be inducted emotionally into others, their emotional field or whatever they're
you could be messing up people's day because of your bunions.
Huh.
You could.
Okay. So we've got to walk around kind of being aware and kind of measuring this and maybe engaging in your own sort of barometer of your feeling, what's going on, so that maybe, okay, I'm aware of this and I don't need it to ruin my entire day.
Or
because
other
this is a
states.
bad experience.
Right. And I think there's a message, and maybe we can talk about this more at some point too, is part of this is we live in a culture that is much more cognitive centered. It's much more in terms of thinking and feeling. And one of the things that I think we often do as therapists is we educate people about their feelings. We get them to be able to name them, own them, and then to be to in some way integrate parts of themselves that I think that culturally are put into conflict. And so part of this notion of emotional induction is the beginning of thinking about other people's feelings and your feelings interact. And I think that's a step toward, I hate to use the word happy, but certain contentment.
Right.
Some of the positive psychology movement often is dealing with some of this notion of emotional induction and being able to be better equipped to deal and integrate with your feelings.
Well, it's an important lesson for all of us. So I'm glad you brought in the notion today of emotional induction. We talked about
And Cher's mom.
And we talked about a number of things: the Frappuccino, the D word.
Cher's mom,
I
think she was like 81 today.
Really? And she came out with a new
she had like
tune.
a song or something.
Oh.
That's what I heard. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll maybe people out in our listening, viewing audience can look that up and follow through with that. We're so glad you came in to the studio here at Columbus State University's television studio here in Jordan Hall. So each week you can tune in and hear Dan Rose, Got Therapy. We'll see you next time.